Thank you, Keith. I'm here to introduce to you the Rob and Jono show. And this is Rob's swan song because he's now on gardening leave after a successful takeover by Ramelius for Musgrave. And I'm actually happy to say that Musgrave is one of the few companies I've actually made money out of in the junior sector. So I'm really looking forward to listening to his talk. Rob's got more than 35 years experience in gold-based metals, started off with Western Mining, had a lot to do with the Nebo-Babel discovery in the Musgrave region, and also Norseman and at Bibra, which I think is where I first met him, and also at Kew. And he's dabbled in uranium as well with the Duke and Batman deposits and something called Honeypot, which sounds exciting. And Jono is a geologist with over 12 years experience, and he joined Musgrave after he'd been working with Barrick Gold, Northern Star and Kin Mining. And when he was with Northern Star, he was part of the team that took the Pegasus deposit from discovery to more than 1 million ounces. So welcome Rob to start and Jono to finish.
Thanks, Linda. We'll be having a little bit of a slightly different take this afternoon, so I'll talk a bit of corporate mumbo-jumbo and then hand over to the good stuff to Jono. So just to start off, we've got a great disclaimer, but we're going to start with the end. We'll go back to the start, we'll pivot, we'll come back to Kew, we'll do a deal, we'll get into a bit of history, a little bit of initial discovery, local geology, regional geology, mineral resources, development, key learnings, acknowledgements, done. So really, for us, this is the end. So in June, a takeover was put on the table for us by Westgold. A revised offer was put up, or a better offer was put up by Ramelius. That offer was recommended by the Musgrave board. The initial offer was a 17% premium, went up to a 33% premium by Ramelius. The directors recommended it at 33%. When it finalised, it ended up being 52% relative share price variability. And today, or 2 days ago, it was roughly around a 69% premium if you had held your Ramelius stock. So this is what it looks like. So we started off at a 25-cent IPO. 8 years later, we got back to 25 cents. I had a phone call from a shareholder. He says, "Congratulations, you've finally got the share price back to what I paid 8 years ago." I said, "Thanks, Dad." So we went down to a low of 0.9 cents. That's a month after we acquired the Kew project. So if you had bought then, you would have been a very happy shareholder, as long as you don't sell. Sort of things worked out, for us at least, during COVID. Didn't work out so well for some. But we've raised over our period $72 million. We end up getting a final valuation, effectively, of about 250 mil. So it's a reasonable return to shareholders. What we have done is made it into one of Alan Trench's bestsellers. I think that's 20 copies sold. We started in the Musgrave region of South Australia, using a bit of cred from Nebo-Babel. So that got us started as an IPO. So we're one of the largest greenfield IPOs in 2011. We raised $20 million 3 weeks after the Fukushima disaster and tsunami and crash in the share market. So that sent us from 25 cents all the way down. We also were focusing on nickel and copper in the Musgrave region. The market was fairly poor after that period, and we pivoted. We moved across to South Australia. We're looking at zinc and copper in South Australia. Nova was discovered in the Fraser Range. Having a little bit of nickel and copper experience, we moved across to the Fraser Range, picked up some ground there. And then we continued to look for projects. So as we were talking about warts and all, we looked at 160 projects in 18 months. It's a lot of projects. We went through a period where we had to retrench people. We got down to our last $2.5 million. We went through all the way through and made offers on 8 projects. So of that, there are a few projects in there that you're probably well aware of that we didn't acquire. We looked at acquiring Nebo Babel back off BHP. We missed out by $50,000. It's now worth $1.2 billion. We look at acquiring the Andover project that Mark Creasy had, which we thought the nickel opportunity there looked reasonable, but was it worth risking the company on? Couldn't quite take that risk, but there's a lot of lithium there now, probably worth about $1.2 billion. So you have to ask, we went back to the drawing board, we asked ourselves, why? Why are we missing out on some of these opportunities? And really, it's a sliding doors moment. So subsequent to that, we were successful in acquiring the Q project. But one realisation is there are links between what you do in your private life and what you do in your work life with risk. I felt that I wasn't taking enough risks. I'd always wanted to buy a motorbike. I bought a motorbike. Took a couple of mates, we went to Nepal. We rode through the Himalayas. 8 months after the landslides that totaled that bus, we decided that it was important to take a few risks, but calculated risks. Don't ride before the landslides. So really reassessing the strategy and evaluating regularly. You want to evaluate what you're doing. You need to be persistent about what you do, have confidence in your project, but we also pivoted. We pivoted out of the South Australian Musgrave and into the Q region. There was no love for greenfields opportunities. It was really that period of time where no one wanted to invest in greenfields. There was no money. If you don't have money, you can't drill holes, you can't make a discovery. The market is always cyclical. When we went into gold in Q, gold price was $1,200 Aussie. It was crap. But that gave us the opportunity to get involved at Q. You've got to survive through the tough times. Times will get better. You just got to survive through. Risk reward. We looked at 160 projects. We made offers on 8. I think the other 6, they're probably still out there. But there are a lot of frogs. Again, talking about risk reward, we had to tweak our risk profile. Deals are about win-win. Both sides have to win in doing a deal. You want everyone to come away happy. And in our Q project, we think it was win-win. It was a pretty tough time. And why do we pivot to Q? We wanted a project that was a little bit more advanced. As I said, there was no love for greenfields. We got a project here that had a small gold resource and a copper resource. Gives you that duality focus. If gold's down, there's an opportunity for copper. Stable jurisdiction and reasonable land access with strong exploration upside and potential. We liked the fact that the project had a primary first order structure with second order splays off it. It was shallow cover, 2 to 4 metres of clay pan over most of it. And as such, there was exploration opportunity here. So late in 2015, it was a pretty tough time for Silver Lake as well. They had they were an existing shareholder base for us. They had 4.5% of Musgrave, so there was a relationship there. It's important to maintain your relationships with the industry. The people you work with now might not be the people you work with in the future, but you will always, if they respect what you do and who you are, you always have that relationship. At the time, Silver Lake had a market cap of $70 million. Gold price, as I mentioned, $1,200. They had a pit wall collapse. They needed to focus back on their main core assets. When you focus back on their main core assets, the lower hanging fruit stuff falls off. We were able to acquire that project. Now, Silver Lake are actually about $1 billion market cap. It's worked for them, it's got them up, back and running, and it's got a project for us. So at the time, the deal was about $75,000 and also had a $250,000 mining trigger payment, so not a huge amount of cash. $4.5 million in the ground. We didn't have $4.5 million, but we thought we could be successful enough to raise more money if we had some success in the drilling. And there was also an important key trigger in here is the 1.5% royalty, but also the fact that Musgrave retained a preemptive right. So in 2017, Westgold had acquired the Comet project around us and the Tuckabianna Mill, which we didn't have enough money to acquire at the time. And they put an offer in on the 20% interest in the JV that was held by Silver Lake, but because of the preemptive right, we could match that. That allowed us to get to 100% of the project, which was really important for the future of this project. And the future acquisition, which was by Ramilius. A bit of gold mining history, just quickly. Gold was discovered in 1892 here, so one of the first gold fields in WA. The town of Austin, gazetted west of the island. So this area in here is the island. This is Salt Lake. The Q deposits are down here, the Moyagee deposits. But this area here is Austin, and that had 15,000 people living there at the turn of the century. There was a railway line running through it. Obviously, gold boom. Gold discovered there. At break of day itself, there was nearly 12,000 ounces at about 39 grams. So this project had a history of being able to produce high grades. We just needed to find more. In the 1980s, Perilia discovered the Lena deposit, which is very close to the high-grade break of day deposit, and worked on that in the 90s. So when we acquired here, there was about 70,000 ounces at Lena. Perilia moved back into base metals, so they moved back to Broken Hill, and they relinquished the project. Not from the reports saying that they didn't like it, but it was a corporate decision. The initial discovery, so our first drilling program after the acquisition, drill hole 16 MORC 001, intersected two intervals, 2 metres at 25 and 2 metres at 22. So the initial interpretation was that we had effectively a single lode. This suggested there was either a bifurcation or there was potentially two lodes. At this stage, the deposit had 20,000 ounces on the resource at break of day at 1.9 grams. As we move forward into 2017, so we'd done a number of drilling programs in between, and you can see here we didn't quite understand the geology. Do we have a bifurcation? Do we have a linking structure? Do we have a large-scale burden? But it didn't quite make sense. So we really needed to move forward, and at this stage we had 200,000 ounces of gold here. It was effectively not going to be economic in its own right. So what now? We had $2.9 million cash. We'd done a capital raise. We had 3.8 million tonnes at 3.1, 380,000 ounces. Not enough to be a standalone operation. We reassessed strategy. So again, you're reassessing your strategy all the way through. We focused back on the lake. We identified Lake Austin North and West Island. Two areas to focus on. Minor key point here too is one of the only reasons we did that is Demir's threatened to take the project off us because we hadn't spent enough money on the tenements on the lake. So we should be spending some more money. So we did. made a discovery at Lake Austin North, thanks to Mears. And then in 2018, that was 2018, we commenced discussions with Westgold on a profit-sharing arrangement for a break of day. We knew we couldn't do this on our own. Westgold liked it. They thought they could spend the money and do it. That fell through, and they terminated that arrangement or that negotiation. We divested our copper asset, and that allowed us to refocus at break of day. And that refocus at break of day really led to the discoveries at Starlight, White Light, which again was really important in moving forward with the project. So I'll pass over to Jono in a sec, but really at this point everything sort of aligns during COVID and the Starlight discovery, and we're talking about alignment. Gold had jumped up to 2,800. The Australian government was very helpful in handing a lot of people cash, which they couldn't put into the market because interest rates were zero. They bought a bit online shopping and had a bit extra cash, so they invested in stocks like Musgrave. Thank you very much. And that was a big jump, but we probably overrun, and then we came back and we're sitting around that 35, 36 cents mark for quite a while. That's the Starlight area, 14 metres, 190 grams, sitting in here. Gravity, north-south structures. We've got these second-order displays coming off, and this will be the focus area that most of Jono's talk will be on here. So I'll pass over now to Jono to talk about some of the regional geology.
Thanks, Rob. And I just want to particularly thank Rob for inviting me to share this presentation with him. Okay, so as Rob said, I'm going to talk a bit more about the geology of the Q project and the current thinking behind the formation and emplacement of these structures. So regionally, this is where we sit. Unsurprisingly, the Q project is located around the town of Kew. It's in an area with a lot of known large deposits. So around the Mount Magnet area to the south, you have Hill 50, Morning Star. In the Kew region, you've got Great Fingal, Big Bell, and then further north around Meekatharra, you've got Bluebird, Paddy's Flat, among others. The Q project itself is actually two sub-projects. So you've got the satellite project of Tuckabianna just to the east, which contains a small resource component. But the main project area and the primary focus of this presentation is the Moyagee project. So the dominant structural feature in the area is the Cuddingwarra Shear, which runs north to south from Mount Magnet in the south up through Kew and then bends round to the northeast. And splaying off that is the second order Lena Shear, and most of the Moyagee deposits are located spatially close to that shear zone, within about 5 kilometres of the main Cuddingwarra Shear. So a real classic orogenic gold setting. In terms of the rocks, we've got Archean greenstone volcanic packages of the Norrie and Palel groups of the Murchison supergroup. So zooming in a bit on the local geology at Moyagee. So we have a package of mafic, ultramafic volcanics with some sediments and intermediates higher up in the sequence. That's intruded by dolerite sills and felsic porphyries. In the oldest part of the sequence, on the eastern side, there's actually mineralization all through the sequence, but on the oldest part of the sequence, there's a unit of high magnesium basalts, banded irons, and dolerite sills, and that contains a few small deposits. You've got the 35,000 ounce Numbers deposit, you've got the pre-resource Waratah prospect, and then you've also got the mainland project 14 kilometers to the northeast. So that's also held by Musgrave. There's no current resources on that project, but it was a fairly significant historic mining centre up to about the 1930s, producing sort of 25,000 ounces at 100 grams per tonne. And it's still producing really nice finds today. So some of those nuggets are from a prospector that Musgrave has an agreement with. So they're not Musgrave property, but you know, you can't have too many pictures of nuggets in a presentation. Moving up the sequence, I probably should just mention that the whole strat is transected by those splays off the Cuddingwarra. We've already mentioned the Lena Shear. We also have the Big Sky Shear as well, and both of those structures are quite key for a lot of the mineralization we see at Moyagee. So moving up the sequence, we get to the good stuff. So sandwiched between a couple of high magnesium basalts, you get a tholeiitic basalt unit called the Starlight Basalt. And that is, you can divide that into two. There's a lower iron-rich tholeite and an upper with increased magnesium. And that unit is key because that hosts all the deposits on the break of day trend. So the break of day trend basically includes all of the high-grade deposits at Moyagee. That comprises the break of day deposit itself and the smaller White Heat deposit just to the south. There's several different orientations present there. It's not a particularly thick unit, the Starlight Basalt. It's only around 120 meters thick in the break of day area, but all of those lodes in all of those orientations are pretty much restricted to that Starlight Basalt unit. And all of those orientations see spectacular grades. So most of the thickest veins and highest grades are seen in the northwest trending structures, particularly Starlight, which is where that's produced a lot of the really spectacular grades over the last few years for Musgrave, including the 14 at 191, you can see there from 4 meters, so just below surface. And then there's also White Light just to the south, producing 6 at 48, and White Heat as well, producing 3 at 100. But there's really high grades in the other orientations as well. So you've got those north-south trending orientations, the Twilight and Velvet lodes. Twilight recently, from a grade control program, produced 18 at 71 from just 7 meters. And then you have the Mosaic lode, just to the south at the White Heat Mosaic deposit. And that's in an east-northeast orientation, so a completely new orientation again. And Mosaic is quite an interesting case study. That was originally intersected while we were testing White Heat at depth. And we hit an unexpected intercept from 25 meters of 15 at 111. So we got really excited. We stepped out to the east and the west, assuming that we had basically a parallel lode to White Heat, and we got nothing. But fortunately, we put a diamond hole under the original RC intercept at the same time, which produced 2.8 meters at 122. So pretty much followed up the original intercept and allowed us to confirm that we were looking at a completely new orientation of that east-northeast. So a really nice case study for the value in an early diamond hole at a prospect. So why the Starlight Basalt? As I said, it contains all of the high-grade deposits at Moyagee. So there's clearly a physical competency contrast between the low-strain Starlight Basalt and the surrounding high magnesium basalts. The lower Starlight Basalt particularly has a well-preserved pillow texture, amygdaloidal texture. I think you can see amygdales in the bottom right corner of that right-hand photo. And then the surrounding high magnesium basalts are relatively higher strain. There's not huge strain in those units, but they are relatively higher. And then when you step out further to the west, you see much, much higher strain. So that left-hand photo there is the ultramafic at the Lena deposit, which has focused most of the strain along the Lena shear. And you see boudinage folded veins all through that unit. So, as I said, a clear kind of physical competency contrast for that unit, but there's also a geochemical component as well. The lower Starlight Basalt particularly is an iron-rich tholeite. So there's that potential for a chemical trap there as well. And correlating with the iron, it's also got very high titanium. And it's got such high titanium that it's really handy for lithogeochemistry. So in the region of sort of 1.2% is fairly typical for that unit. And that has made it really jump out in the lithogeochem. It's diagnostically high and has allowed us to map that unit through the strat, which, considering that unit hosts almost all of our high-grade deposits, has been a really useful exploration tool at Moyagee. But that is only the lower Starlight Basalt. So as I said, there's an upper Starlight Basalt with increased magnesium. So it can't be a purely chemical influence causing the dropout of the gold. This is what mineralization at the break of day trend looks like. So they are multi-phase quartz breccia veins. That photo on the bottom left is from an intercept at Starlight. Not one of the most spectacular, 5.6 at 12.7, but pretty good representation of what the vein actually looks like. It's from fairly deep in the deposit, at 257 meters. And then that photo in the top right is that mosaic hole that I mentioned. So that produced 2.8 at 122, which confirmed that east-northeast orientation for mosaic. There's not a huge amount of sulfide in these veins, but there's a bit of pyrite, and then very minor chalcopyrite, pyrrhotite, sphalerite, but almost exclusively pyrite in the sulfides. In terms of pathfinder anomalism, gold is very much associated with arsenic, tungsten, tellurium, and silver. And there's not a huge alteration halo around these veins, typically under a meter of sort of silica, sericite, carbonate, albite, sulfide alteration. And that photo in the bottom right there is a good example of that. So that's just a 10 centimeter vein selvage alteration adjacent to a really high-grade vein. And hopefully you can see gold kind of dotted through that vein. It was a fairly skinny vein at white heat, only half a meter, but ran at 365 grams per ton. And there's a couple of cross-sections here. So these cross-sections are from the recent grade control program. So they actually only show the kind of top 50 meters of each of these lodes. We've got the starlight lode on the left and the white heat lode on the right. But what they do show is how close to surface these really high grades do reach. So we've got 17 at 43 from starlight, maybe sort of 4 or 5 meters below surface. White heat, not quite as spectacular, but still lots of good grade close to surface in that 2 at 38. And what these cross-sections also show is one of the probable reasons why these things have been left undiscovered for so long. There's a lot of historic working in the area, and these lodes are at a grade that would be absolutely fine for the old timers 100 years ago, but they're just covered by sort of a 3 to 5 meter thick ferruginous hardpan layer, which has hidden it from the old timers, 100 plus years ago, and also from modern geochemical methods. So soil sampling rarely sees anything over these high-grade lodes through the hardpan. We have tried a couple of orientation surveys with some of the newer techniques, things like ultrafine offered at Lab West, and we've not got a sniff on top of 15 at 100 grams. So what do we think these veins are? Originally, we thought possibly tension vein arrays opening up in the brittle basalt unit, but you can trace these structures through the strat very subtly in the geophys, and they appear to have little refractions through that prospective brittle unit. So I won't leave these kind of harsh aeromag images up too long, especially at this time of day, but hopefully you can trace subtly those northwest trending structures and potentially the east-northeast trending structures as well that intersect the ore zones at break of day and white heat. And our, there we go, they're put on there interpt. So you can see a lot of those structures cutting across the whole strat. And our structural consultant, Mike Althwaite, and a co-author on this paper, he's done a lot of work looking into these structures and did a bit of a deep dive on the nearby Great Fingal deposit as well, and picked out some key similarities between the two deposits. So we're looking at different scales and different host rocks, a quartz dolerite at Great Fingal and a basalt at starlight at break of day, white heat. But they have key similarities. So you can see the refraction of the structures through the favorable host unit. And you can also see that the thickest, highest grade mineralization tends to be in the most refracted part of the structure, which is the most dilational. And as well as being an excellent structural geo, Mike's also got a sideline as a talented geological cartoonist. And he's put this together to really simply explain the current thinking behind the formation of these structures and the key factors involved. So I hope this works. Okay, so we start with our relatively competent unit, in this case the starlight basalt. And then as shear zones propagate towards the unit, the angle that they intersect the unit is crucial for how these structures are refracted. If it's too low, it will just go down the contact and not cut the unit at all. And if it's too high, it won't be refracted at all and will just go straight through. When the angle is just right, you get maximum refraction of that structure through the competent unit, which, when you get east-west compression and sinistral movement on that shear, opens up a really nice dilation zone. And that's what we think is the main cause of these veins, particularly the northwest trending veins, and gives you that classic sigmoidal shape that we see, particularly at Starlight, the highest grade and thickest vein at Moyagee. So it's a combination of the angle that the shear zones actually intersect the unit and that those sinistral kinematics. So that's the break of day trend. That's the real crown jewels of the Moyagee deposits. But I'll just go through a couple of the other deposits that form the resource base at Moyagee. So we've got Lena. Lena sits 150 meters to the northwest of Break of Day. It's not a Musgrave discovery. I think Rob touched on that. It was discovered in the 90s by Perillia. It's hosted in strongly sheared ultramafic, which, as I said, has focused most of that shear along the Lena shear zone itself. And all the mineralized lodes at Lena are running shear parallel, so sort of trending to the northeast. They can often be associated with porphyry contacts, so there's porphyries intruded into the ultramafic package, just giving you those internal competency contrasts within the ultramafic unit itself. They tend to be sort of packages of veins, with maximum widths of individual veins of around 1 meter, sort of quartz sulfide veins, and that is a classic example in that core photo there. So you can see lots of individual veins within a strongly sheared package of ultramafics. And that produced an intercept of 3.3 at 19.4. So yeah, the Lena resource currently totals 325,000 ounces at 2.3, so much lower grade than those that break-a-day trend high-grade deposits. You can probably see in that photo as well a few folded veins through that sheared ultramafic, and that's a classic thing you see at Lena. You'll see strongly folded, boudinage, transposed veins all through the Lena shear. There really is a lot of deformation in there. So in that left-hand photo, you can see boudinage veins and folded veins. The middle one is a series of folded and boudinage mineralized veins. And then that right-hand photo is a folded vein with really thickened hinge zones. And they're all from sort of Lena mineralized zones. The alteration at Lena is typically sort of biotite, sericite, albite, sulfide. And then I'll just touch on Big Sky. So the Big Sky deposit is a more recent Musgrave discovery. It's a few kilometers to the southwest of Break of Day. It's very strongly weathered down to sort of 100 plus meters, and it really hasn't been drilled out much below that. So still in the early days of understanding what's actually going on at Big Sky. The resource grade is a lot lower, at just 1.2 currently, but there are high-grade zones within that. So those nuggets that you can see there, they're produced from an RC hole that produced a meter at 759. So there are pockets of extreme high grades within that overall lower grade deposit. Big Sky has a lot of similarities to Lena. So similarly, it's a splay off the Cutting Warra, but the Big Sky shear is trending more north-south, sort of sub-parallel to the main Cutting Warra. It's about a 100-meter wide zone of shearing. It's focused in a more ductile unit, very similar to the Lena ultramafic, but in this case, it's a sediment package, and there's porphyries, again, intruding through that. So a lot of similarities to Lena, and you see similar folding and boudinaging of the veins throughout, as you can see in those two photos there. So folded, boudinaged, quartz sulfide veins within the sericite-altered porphyry. And then just one final point to mention about Big Sky is the presence of the Lake Austin dolerite unit. So it's just to the east of the main mineralized lodes at Big Sky. The reason why that's significant to mention is that's the same unit that thickens further to the north and it's a differentiated dolerite sill that hosts the West Island deposit further north on the joint venture that Musgrave has with Evolution. And that's been a focus of Evolution's work up there for the last few years, defining the West Island prospect. So that's the current state of our resource. There's a lot of text on there, but I guess the key things to point out are the total Q project resource of 927,000 ounces at 2.3. That includes obviously a Tuckabianna component, so taking purely just Moyagee, we sit at 868 at 2.5. And then the key subset of that is that high-grade trend, which totals 327,000 ounces at 10.4. So we fully recognize, especially against some of the deposits you see here, we are very much a baby, but with it being so, all of the deposits being so near surface, and particularly those high-grade trend deposits, it still provides a real compelling case for development, which I'll hand back over to Rob to go over now.
Thanks, Jono. So just quickly on the development side, close to surface, very high grade, and we're within 40 k's of existing infrastructure. So we're 40 k's from Ramelius's plant at Mount Magnet. The intent really is for them to get that ore from Musgrave's deposits back down into that plant, the Checkers Mill at Mount Magnet. So we can see here there's a field of deposits, and what we're looking at are these Lena, Break of Day, White Heat, and then Big Sky down here. So from the PFS that Musgrave ran before the takeover, the project made about 300 million net cash flow at 2,650 Aussie, sitting at now, we ran it at spot, 2,950, making 400 plus mil. But if you take away 90 odd mil for a capital development, it's getting up over 500. And if you add another 40 or 50 mil for the extra $100 we're seeing in the current Australian gold price, it's well over that sort of 500, 550. Again, some of that economics, but obviously out of date with the gold price continuing to rise. Some of the key lessons, we've talked about a few of them. Nothing works as well as hard work. Maintain your integrity. Forget your ego. Be humble. Financial support is imperative. If you don't have money, you can't drill holes. Reduce your admin, reduce your black and red tape as much as you can. Perspective is important. You need to be permissive. It needs to be permissive that the deposit is in the ground that you hold. If it's not there, you are never going to find it. Is it possible or is it likely? Incorporate the economics, and we've heard from previous speakers about this, is incorporating the economics in every step, major step that you do. There's no point in having a huge resource if it's uneconomic. Run your models, get an engineer in there, or if you can outsource it, run your optimizations and do them regularly and early. Environment access, obviously really important and key components. License to operate, again, act with integrity. Competitive advantage. People think about competitive advantage as being something that you have that nobody else has. That's not the case. It is something that you have. Other people might have it, but everyone has something. You've worked in an area before. That is a competitive advantage. You know somebody. That is a competitive advantage. You need to use all your competitive advantages that you have at a particular point in time to get the project that you want, make the right decisions at the right time, talk to the people that you know in the industry, get ideas, do whatever you need to do to make it happen. Teamwork. Get a team that works well together. You don't have to think the same, you just have to work well together. It's important to have people that think outside the box, people that disagree with ideas. But at the end of the day, you get alignment from the team, you get alignment from the board, and you go. Process and persistence. You can't find something on every bit of ground. We moved from the Musgrave into Kew. Again, you've got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Sometimes you haven't got anything on the ground, move on. Challenge your paradigms, think outside the box. We turn the rig around. It's not quite as simple as turning the rig around to find a deposit. So there are some of the components of turning the rig around. If we turn the rig around and found out we'd drilled down a deposit, you're losing 20 to 40% of your resource. Do you really want to do that? You have to think a few times about wanting to do that. But at the end of the day, if you want to get the geology right, if you've got the money to do it and you've got money to move past that point and go on, then turn the rig around and test. Just remember, no one is right all the time. So look for alternative opinions. Most importantly, I'd like to thank people that have worked on the project at the moment, people who have worked on this project in the past, and there'll be people working on this project in the future. It's not just the people that make decisions at that point in time, it's people that have made decisions previously. So thank you to everyone that's been in the Musgrave team over the whole history of this company, and there's a few. Some people have worked for us for weeks and some people have worked for us for 12 years. So thank you very much to every single person. That's it. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Rob. Have we got any questions for Rob or Jono? If not, we'll move on in the interest of beers at the end of this.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Rob.